Hi, everyone. Today I'm joined by Murray Hurst. Hi, Murray. Welcome.
Hello, Chrissy. How are you today?
Very good. And I'm going to talk a bit about your experience, but the bio on the back of your new book says a lot of things perfectly. So I'll introduce you by reading the back of your book, if you don't mind.
Yes, that's fine.
So Murray Hurst, a coach in the NRL for several years, was infamously sacked as head coach of the North Queensland Cowboys in 2002. He has been an influential figure in Queensland Rugby League for more than 30 years. With an illustrious record, Murray coached Queensland Emerging State of Origin, Australia Under-17, and numerous Queensland representative teams. He also assisted Wayne Bennett with Queensland State of Origin and was head coach of Tonga for the 2000 World Cup. As an NRL wellbeing and education manager for Queensland, Murray brought compassion and strength to the role while working with families affected by player suicide. He is a man who has shown that good leaders must be good listeners. Murray credits his resilience and ability to listen deeply to growing up on the family sheep station in Surat in outback Queensland in the 1960s. He learned all about hardship, being the youngest of 5 on a working farm. Through drought, loss of sheep, floods, and tough times, Murray learned the skills that he first brought to the field of coaching and now takes with him into his next challenge, a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. Told with simplicity and depth, Murray's story is one of resilience, and it is far from over. So congratulations on your book, Murray.
Thank you very much, Chrissy. Yes.
As you know, I've had the pleasure of reading it. And what struck me about your book is that it's part bio, part history, and part self-help. So it's kind of 3 in one.
Yes, you could say that. It's just, I hope there's a few messages there.
Yeah, it is. It touches several different genres. Was that your intention, or did it come about by accident, do you think?
No, that was my intention. I didn't want to be just another bio or autobiography like sports people normally have. I see that as just part of my life, but it didn't define me. So I'd rather people be aware of me and my strengths, I guess, in my lifetime, not just in rugby league coaching.
Yes, awesome. So we met by accident. And I've met a lot of awesome people by accident in the last few years. So I use that as my little intro sometimes. So we met by accident when I was at a market with my books. And I saw you kind of hanging back, looking, observing what was going on. And then I invited you to have a look. And then you told me who you were. Mm-hmm. And I felt like our lives have been on parallel dimensions, just at different decades, as it were. So both growing up on a property, both traveling around the world as a result of sport, both having a short encounter with the Cowboys, and then going on to kind of come back to yourself and back to your roots, and then really wanting to share your message and your story with people. So I do feel like we have a lot of things in common.
Yes, I would agree.
And I wanted to, having read your book and now spent some time having coffee with you, there's a lot of questions I thought would be relevant to people who don't necessarily know you so well, but also people who may have known a little bit about you throughout your career, let's say, but may not know the full person. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to share with people today.
Yes.
And as always with my interviews, I like to have an angle for health and wellness and well-being. So we'll touch on that as well.
That'll be very good.
Good. So my opening question really is that you've coached individuals and teams for pretty much more than 40 years. What have you learned the most about people during this time?
Well, I think that the realisation that no two are identical, and that's the world over, I guess, even though some might be very, very similar in looks and traits and even personality. But when you think of that, the difference in people, it can be constructed by their socioeconomic upbringing or their culture, and obviously the events that have occurred in their lives since they were babies, more or less. And I realised very early in my coaching that I had to treat players very differently. Two were not the same, and the further I got into it, the more cultures I finished up coaching. And when you think of Tongans and Samoans and Fijians, Papua New Guineans, and obviously the Brits and obviously Australians and Indigenous people who are just they're very humble, and they take time, but I really have a liking for them, and so I did learn a lot from that period. Yes.
It's interesting what you say, isn't it? The cultural nuances, because I don't think that's talked about enough in leadership or in professional environments. And having worked in many countries myself, I've felt that the cultural nuances and understanding makes you as successful as actually your ability to get the job done. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. And you can't get the job done unless you, one, have empathy for the people and their culture, and even their family situations, which is always what I without in being intrusive, I really try to discover how life was at home, and even their families and extended families. So I think that does help when you try and get the best out of people, and their day-to-day lives, and what makes them happy and unhappy, and what makes them perform at the highest level.
Yeah, that's true. And even, taking time to live and work there, I think adds a whole different dimension, because you see things,
Yeah.
in a different way. What skill did you develop early in life that's helped you most throughout adulthood?
Yes, well, early in life, I guess, as is mentioned in the book, I grew up on a sheep property, and anyone who does that understands that they're on shaky ground to start with, and
Yes.
through droughts and floods, and they say Australia is born by those incidents and events that happen. A land of drought and flooding plain, and I think being the youngest of 5 children, and being brought up on a property where it was remote and you don't really see a lot of people, you learn a lot from your siblings and your parents and those that are working on the property. So I grew up quite quickly, being the youngest, and, like, for instance, we didn't have electricity till I was 16, and so that was hard for Mum because she had 5 children in 4 years. But yeah, I learned that you had to listen and you had to watch, and those two things amount to learning. And I thought I learned a lot about people and people's moods more so, and how I fit into a group. So, and then when I went to boarding school from there, it was a huge and rude awakening for me, because it was a big world. And
Yes.
because growing up, when we went from Surat to Roma, it was a big trip to a big city. It was only an hour away, but there's a huge world out there, and I didn't think for 1 minute I'd be involved in this big, huge world. There's 2 adjectives there, but also, that I only ever intended being on the land. So it really didn't bother me that all this was happening around me in this big world, and always thought I'd be back where I came from.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because you grew up on a property and then you end up traveling to some of the biggest cities in the world. And
Yes.
I think sometimes going to boarding school prepares you for that, because you're totally out of your comfort zone and you've got to rely on strangers very quickly, and you learn who you can trust and who you need to kind of watch out for quite quickly. Did you feel that you were streetwise when you went away?
Oh no, very much the opposite. The manners and politeness which was indoctrinated into us, the 5 children in the family, that paid for nothing when you come up with a lot of people around you, and they have their targets or their goals or the things they want, or where they want to go, and saying sorry or excuse me were just not prevalent. And I really think that's even got much more obvious today.
It can wear you down. I felt like that on the tube in London many days. just
Yes, you
just
would.
totally fed up with the inconsiderateness of people to each other, and that still is a bugbear of mine today. People being
Yeah,
inconsiderate to each other, it really affects me. That's
yeah,
interesting. And you mentioned about listening and
mm,
watching, because I think, always as a kid, things were pointed out to you and you knew that danger was imminent if you didn't listen, and you didn't watch out where you were going. And I'm a bit of a tyrant with that, with my two young kids as well, especially,
mm,
growing up in the town. But I do feel like I'm probably a bit more of a helicopter parent than a lot of people, because I've been grown up and conditioned to be watching out and listening and thinking of dangerous things, because the flying doctor doesn't just arrive in 5 minutes, do they?
no, 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 it's an interesting one because these days they use the term helicopter parent, and then there are others that are completely the opposite, as in they just let the children or the child do their own thing, and it seems sometimes they appear to be more of an inconvenience to the parents, and on parenting, I think it probably is the biggest issue in the world. I mean, we talk about drugs and we talk about domestic violence and all of these things. And when you think of parenting, it's not something you get training in. You as a parent can only adopt how you were treated as a child. Hence, it can be a snowballing effect, for parents down the line. But you can only do what your parents did. So that's the only training you get. And obviously, some people are meant to be parents. They're very good from the beginning, and they continue to be so throughout their years. But it's a tough one. As no one ever said it was easy being a parent. It's easier having babies than it is to be a parent, isn't it?
It's the toughest job in the world. I used to get paid quite well. People were paid to listen to me and I was paid to talk to people. Now no one listens to me. And I don't get paid for all the talking that I do either. So
Oh, well, you'll go through another stage yet, and that is that you won't be noticed when you're in a lineup.
yes, well, that's true. So I'm working hard to stop those things from
It won't
occurring in
happen
my
to you.
life. But my motto is, when you know better, you do better. So I think
Oh,
each
yes.
time I learn something, or of what I've learned
Very
from
good.
my parents or my grandparents, it's about knowing better and doing better, isn't it?
Yes, that's good.
So you grew up in the land surrounded by animals, and that, I think, that sense of space, that probably both you and I had, and that deep connection you have with the land, is something that we've obviously moved away from more and more in modern society. But how do you think that plays a part in our well-being?
Yes, I think like I have a deep affection for animals, all animals, and I guess most particularly dogs and horses. But I think being around those two types of animals, it's just a settling and a soothing effect that you get from them. It's the old adage that a dog is a man's best friend. Well, it's definite. And when you think about what they do for a person, that there's so many facets in society now where we talk about the dogs that are used for soldiers coming back with PTSD, and not just soldiers, but police and everything. And I was involved in a little bit of that situation down at the Sunshine Coast, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of soldiers that have come back, and they're really struggling. And these dogs they're not any particular breed, but they're trained to offer sympathy and empathy and just closeness. And as you know, you can say anything to an animal, they don't talk back, but you can tell by their reaction that they're close to you. And even horses are being used for similar situations for those young people. I know they've been used when young people have drug problems and other problems, and they want to get away from a situation and be in a situation where they can be close to someone, and they like even hearing and smelling a horse.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because equine therapy and canine therapy is becoming so popular. And if you look on, there's a lot of ads for it on Facebook over this holidays. And I know dogs were taken into schools and nursing homes across our region more recently. So as a practice, it's becoming more and more common. You know, that book that I wrote called Bobby, a Horse Who Teaches a Young Girl How to Love is about that unconditional love that you find from a pet, you know, and that's
Yes.
kind of what you mentioned as well. And we are so far disconnected from that a lot. You know, we're
Yes.
so connected to, you know, our devices.
Oh,
We have
definitely.
less time to connect with creatures and animals. And, you know, that's really where I think a lot of healing and well-being stems from. Would you agree?
Without a doubt, Chrissy, it's you know, it can't be understated the value of an animal around you, and like you say, the equine and the feline. No, not the feline, but the
Canine. But cat lovers would argue there's
yes,
feline as well. So I have a lot of cat lovers in my life.
yes,
But
yes.
yes,
No, it is a very good thing, and it's and particularly around this current period of Christmas, I'm sure that those things will be utilised more than during the year.
absolutely. So you worked as a wellbeing officer in professional sport for many years, and you had to deal with some pretty challenging situations. Did that affect you personally over time?
Well, I think it has, you know, particularly in a year a few years ago when I had 5 suicides to deal with, and a death on field as well, and also losing 3 of my friends from the land. That was a very big drought out west, and it becomes too much for them, and they see no solution. And a lot of the time, you know, the quick fix is okay for them, but it's terrible for families. And I think, you know, with the people skills that seem to have come naturally with me, I really can empathise with the groups that I've dealt with. And when you know, when there's a player suicide, there's a lot of people affected. It's not just their immediate family, but all those around them, including their best mates that they play the sport with, and obviously siblings. And when you have 90 or so sobbing in a room when you walk in, it's a tough situation. And, you know, answering your question, I think it has to affect anyone who is confronted by that, you know, any time. And to have 5 in 4 months, that really, it really changed me, I believe. And I was really making a rod for my own back, because whilst I was doing a good job, I was getting calls from all over country Queensland where there were suicides, and I'd rush to the situation, because people, like you say, with the social media, they look for someone to assist. And strangely enough, I was the one who got the telephone call. And there was a time where I was a bit reluctant to answer the phone, because I was just thinking it was another one and another one. And it got so frequent. So it was hard getting over that. And it's hard on my wife as well. But, you know, time heals, they say. And at the moment, I'm quite good, I think. And the psychologists were at a stage, because I engaged psychologists in the rugby league situation, because we had an organisation that was contracted to the NRL, and eventually they were calling me to check on me, because they could see a change in my persona. And yeah, I know that I was a pretty sad person. So when that happens, and they are the professionals and they know that you need help. So I realised I had to take a step back, but that was only for a month or so.
But it's true, isn't it? Because anyone that's a carer or in that role, especially if you're an empath, which I think that you are, you know, you absorb all of the pain and the suffering of those around you, and then you don't know how to kind of let go of it. Would you agree?
Correct.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. You don't know how to let go. You just harbour all the issues.
And that then makes me think about you know, the caring for the carers and how important it is, you know. And I know a lot of people who work in relationship therapy and psychotherapy, who've just found the last year, terrible because they're dealing with so many challenging situations, in health and wellness and mental health and domestic violence and so on and so on and so forth. And
Yes.
we're going to have a crisis of carers as opposed to a crisis of mainstream population if we're not careful, which kind of leads me to my next question, which is, why do you think well-being's treated as a luxury as opposed to a necessity?
Yes, it is a good question, Chrissy. And I must say that originally there was a stigma about talking about suicide, or initially about mental health issues, because it was just an accepted thing, or a common retort that if someone had a mental health issue that they were psycho, there's keep away from them. They're not, their head's gone. And then that was addressed, and it was when it was addressed, there was obviously professional people involved, and they accepted it. They made it get accepted in society, and then of course suicide. Well, there was all sorts of words, but it was never termed suicide. It was taking their own life, which is right, or attempted to. And once this is addressed and the stigma is broken down from it, then certainly it's one thing to break the stigma down, but you need to have a process or processes in line for people to overcome these states of mind and mental health issues. So that's where, again, in society and then even the health situation around Australia, that there have been a lot of people do studies on it and start organisations and caring organisations and processes. Like I say, when you have resilience, it's not just something that you get from a lecture or something, or a talk or a meeting. It is a process which involves empathy, sympathy and mindfulness. And so that means that organisations are involved with an individual over a period of time, and it can be ongoing. So I think initially breaking down that stigma, and now it should be a necessity, and I think it's becoming that way. And what I'm explaining, I think, is that it's been a cycle. One, to recognise the issue, which was mental health, and breaking that stigma down, and then suicides, and then other critical situations and incidents. So when those are addressed and the solutions are offered, I think that's the cycle I'm talking about, and hopefully now it's available. Well, I know it is, and there's no shame in going to your GP and where he can organise or she can organise a number of visits through Medicare to see a psychologist initially, and if there are other professionals necessary, then that can occur as well. So I really hope it's not for the rich.
No, I know, but one barrier I see, and I'm sure you've encountered this as well in your professional life, is that employers and organizations have to accept the fact that when a person walks into work, they have the whole person.
Yes.
Which is their daytime, their nighttime, their morning time, and everything, and that the whole person needs to be cared for, not just the working person, because your life doesn't stop. In this 24/7 modern world that we have, where if you are a parent, particularly, which is where I'm always focused my mindset at the moment. Your life doesn't stop when you go to work, and if you haven't slept well in days or weeks and you're caring for people, you still want to perform at a high level, but your capacity has changed somewhat. And I think the changing capacity of people in society and the expectations of organizations and employers needs to accept that the whole person needs to be cared for, both in work and out of work, in order to maintain that level of resilience that we all aspire to have.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree. It's the whole person is obviously the priority, and I think it's another cycle that's occurring, and that is that people are employing a person for mental health in the workplace. And let's hope that it's not just when they come in the door and sit down at their desk or whatever they do, that it's they do. I mentioned getting to know the person before. Well, I think that's what these mental health workers need to adopt. I'm not saying they don't already, but in the workplace, like we had it for rugby league players, and I know that I got a lot of inquiry from huge businesses and not so huge businesses about having a person allocated for the mental health of the staff and the well-being more so. And just on the area I work in was well-being and education. Originally, when I started, it was welfare and education, and I always thought that welfare had a connotation of a handout, and it wasn't that. And so we adopted the well-being aspect and the name, and it can cover a lot of things. As we know, it can be psychological well-being, it can be financial well-being, spiritual well-being, and many others, and physical.
Emotional health is something that's still taboo, and I think we're all, if you're labeled as an overly emotional person, okay, maybe you need some help to manage your emotions because you've got so much stuff going on in the periphery, or you're triggered, or there's underlying trauma, or you've had a lot of, grief or challenges in your life. And I think that, yes, it manifests in mental health conditions, but emotional health is something that we just don't talk about enough, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I think, we don't talk about it, and people actually, it's something that is held within, is it not? The very, I won't say very few, but it's not a common thing for people with these issues to release them or let them out or make them known. It's something that you can hide, the emotional health.
Yes. Yeah, but they're the internal scars. If you break your arm, you get a cast.
Yes.
If you have emotional breakdown inside, there's not many, because it's not physical, we just tend to dismiss it. But I think over time it bubbles away and eats at you on the inside, and then you're broken on the inside.
I think it's also to do with, getting to know the person, as I mentioned right at the beginning.
Yes.
And if that hasn't occurred with a clinician, once you meet them and you have the first meeting, you may not like that person or have the feeling of attachment, but it doesn't mean you have to stay with them. And I think that happens with that emotional side. People don't think they can change. Well, there's no skin off anyone's back. If they don't empathise with that person, you can move on to one that you do like.
Yes, that's true. So what advice would you give to young people today who are overwhelmed with information, comparison, and I think image obsession to a certain degree?
Well, I think the advice is that don't ever think that you are on your own. And as I mentioned earlier about no shame in seeking help, and it was the case years ago that people with an issue were considered to be on the outer and that they shouldn't go near them. But it's just a sign. And when you recognise a sign, people should help one another initially. And once again, like even in a group of, say, 20 rugby league players, you have your head coach, you have assistant coach. And I'm saying this because this is the area I was in, but these are still people, and they're all societal issues that they encounter. But the important thing is to talk, and by talking, you never know what you might discover about the person you've approached and who has empathy with you, and therefore it can be easier then to consult a professional about the whole situation. And I've seen situations where, and I don't mind saying that, I've referred people to a psychologist, and 2 weeks later I've contacted them to see how they went, and they said, yes, I've had 2 meetings, Murray, but can I just talk to you? I'd rather just talk to you, and that's, I'm only saying that because it's not just me, it can be any person, if you know what I mean. And I think that's, a really good thing if people do take the time to mention things to someone that they have a connection with, because it'd be very rare if someone who they thought they had a connection with just treated it with disdain and didn't want to help.
Yes, I think we've all met professionals like that, unfortunately, in our life, but that's
Yes.
also the role of a good coach, isn't it? And I think sometimes a well-being coach or a wellness coach can also empathize with that person in a different way, because a lot of that is lived experience. And I think if you haven't had your own lived experience, sometimes it's hard to truly identify empathetically with what the person is going through.
Yeah, that's so true. And in fact, when I interviewed prospective people to go in the wellbeing and education area, the thing that I was looking for most is life experiences. And it helped, and there were people there with qualifications in psychology and things. But I often got the feeling of the connectedness would be difficult with this person, and they also were quite young. And that's no indictment on the people that haven't got the lived experiences, but it certainly helps in this area. And there's no doubt about it. And there'll be people out there that could be very, very good who are of later age that don't realise they are,
Yes.
I think that the world is starting to go back to respecting people with age, to be honest, Chrissy, and because I see a lot of young people taking the time to talk to older people. And I think it helps both those parties.
Yeah, that's good. So your book is called On Shaky Ground, and on the last bit it says you have a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. So how are you keeping yourself well at the moment?
Yes, well, it's an interesting one. There's a lot of people sort of understand or think that Parkinson's is just because of tremor, but that's only part of it. There's it can be slow developing, or it can be quick. Depression and anxiety are huge in this area, as they are in other debilitating brain diseases. But I'm really happy with how I'm going at the moment. It was discovered that I've probably had it for quite 2 or 3 decades, in fact, but it's just really starting to fester. And now I think it has slowed. I've had medication, and I've had in the last 12 months a lot of chopping and changing and talking about seeking professional help. Well, I have done that, and I don't mind saying I've been to neurologists, psychoneurologists, and psychiatrists. And there's another stigma there, isn't there, with psychiatrists? People think that you lie on a couch and someone gets into your brain and everything, but it's far from that. And I believe I have a really good one, and he has helped me a lot in that way. And it could happen that I might need to see him in another few months' time. I'm really happy with how I'm going, Chrissy.
That's great. And we've talked about future books for you. So have you had your thinking cap on about all your future books that you might be writing soon?
Well, in fact, I think every day about what I'd like to write, and every day I can't decide on what topic it should be. And sometimes I think I could write a whole book on the bush and out west, and because they're tough times. And I could also write one on just rugby league. But there are so many of those because of the sports people, and I didn't want it to be one where it's just a sports spruik, so to speak. There's a lot of stories involved, but and also work situations and travel. So I'm not sure. They could even, like, I'm sure you think of ideas for wellness all the time that you'd like to let out there, and I know you've got a goal of writing 2 a year, which is great. I couldn't do that, but I really enjoyed doing this book. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, it gets into your blood, and I think your book is available in paperback, and it will be available in ebook in the next week as well. And I'll share the links to that in the notes to this interview. So just to wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share with us? Murray Hurst, On Shaky Ground. It's a very easy to read book. I love it because it kind of took me back to my childhood a little bit, but also took me on a bit of a travel adventure, which I haven't had in almost 2 years. So thank you for that. And I enjoyed reading all the sports stuff. And when you were coaching in various tournaments around the world. I was visualizing where I was at that time and what I was doing. So it's been a really good experience for me as well. So I thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Chrissy. Lovely.
All right, take care, and I'll see you soon.
Okay, bye-bye now.